Housemarque is one of the most talented indie developers in the world and have been with the PS4 from the start, having released the side-scrolling shooter Resogun to critical acclaim alongside the console's launch in 2013. The studio's commitment to twin-stick shooters inspired by retro arcade coin-ops culminated in 2017 with Next Machina, a top-down shooter made in collaboration with Eugene Jarvis, the legend behind arcade classics such as Defender, Robotron 2084, and Sposh TV. Fittingly, the game mixes elements of all those games and even brings back the hostage-rescuing mechanics from Resogun, only this time you're defending humanity from waves of robotic enemies. A variety of power-ups can be attained in random order in each level, and the game provides a nice sense of empowerment as you stock these power-ups and help each other, though you'll lose power-up each time you die. Much like the best arcade shoot-'em-ups, Next Machina has a high skill ceiling and the real game opens up after you complete the arcade mode once through, as there are a variety of challenges available to put your skills to the test. Sadly, poor sales of Next Machina led to Housemarque releasing a statement in 2017 declaring that arcade is dead and that they would be moving on to different types of game development. If Next Machina really is the last arcade shooter we ever get from Housemarque, at least the studio went out with a hell of a swan song.
A story-focused adventure game featuring a charming art style and a world populated by anthropomorphic animals, Night in the Woods is a deceptively sad exploratory experience that is also equal parts funny and cute. Following a cartoon cat girl named Mallory as she drops out of college and moves back to her hometown of Possum Springs, Night in the Woods leaves it up to the player to delve as deep as they want into the game's narrative. Night in the Woods really is a game about the little details, as many of the best moments come from simple interactions with other characters or playing in a band in one of a variety of entertaining minigames. In terms of gameplay, Night in the Woods doesn't really offer much in the way of challenge, as its platforming sections are really just employed as an excuse to encourage exploration, but then that's not really what this game is about. If you're a fan of story-driven games and are in the mood for an interactive experience that explores some surprisingly serious themes, despite the cute exterior, Night in the Woods takes a pretty nuanced approach to the plight of working-class rural America. This is a game not to be missed.
First released on the PS3 in 2008, Valkyria Chronicles is a tactical RPG set in the fictional region of Europa and is heavily inspired by World War II's European theater. The game features an interesting hybrid design where you control your troops from an overhead map, but can take direct control once the battle starts, transitioning into a third-person shooter where you line up headshots and run for cover. While the presence of shooting mechanics may give the impression that Valkyria Chronicles can be bested with raw shooter skills alone, the game's tactical elements are actually very important for success, as you will find yourself losing battles fast if you don't take the time to plan accordingly. The game's difficulty overall is a bit high, but not unfair, making Valkyria Chronicles ideal for those who don't want their hands held throughout. The art direction is still impressive almost a decade after the game's original release, and is made even better now that it runs at 1080p and 60 frames per second. While this re-release is rather bare bones in terms of additional content, Valkyria Chronicles Remastered is incredibly easy to recommend for anyone who missed the game the first time around.
If you're anything like us and are disappointed by the lack of good Hot Wheels video games out there, barring the excellent Hot Wheels DLC for Forza Horizon 3, of course, then Trackmania Turbo could be your jam. An arcade racer with a heavy focus on speed and stunts, Trackmania Turbo gets a lot of mileage out of its over-the-top track designs, as part of the challenge is just trying to stay on the track when you're contending with all sorts of twists, turns, and loop-de-loops. Throw in a 4-player split-screen mode, a rarity these days, and a budget price, and you've got yourself a fun addition to your PS4 library that's easy to pick up and hard to put down.
A top-down twin-stick shooter that supports up to 4 friends locally, Helldivers is notable for how challenging it is. Unlike most shooters of its ilk, where you recklessly spray and pray to take down hordes of enemies, Helldivers rewards strategy and the careful conservation of resources. Missions are varied in structure and require tactical preparation, as you are able to tweak your loadout before dropping into a mission. Oh, and speaking of drops, you have to watch where you call in ordnance, as air supply drops can crush and kill your allies if they land in the wrong spot, and is the rare co-op game where friendly fire is a legitimate concern. You'll come for the Starship Troopers-inspired tone of Helldiver's story and presentation, but stay for its addictive challenge and gameplay.
One of the more recent releases on this list, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, is a psychological horror action game developed by Ninja Theory, the same studio behind other underappreciated gems such as Enslaved: Odyssey to the West and DMC: Devil May Cry. Tying in elements of Celtic and Norse mythology, the game follows the titular heroine Senua as she travels to the homeland of the Northmen, taking her through a land called Helheim, essentially the Norse version of Hell. Throughout its 6 to 8 hour story, Hellblade is an overwhelmingly sensory experience, to the point where the game actually recommends that you wear headphones while playing. The use of audio and visual distortion in Hellblade is truly something to behold, as the game smartly uses these elements to convey Senua's psychosis and delusion as she further descends into a nightmarish world where what you don't see is almost more terrifying than what you do. Hellblade may not be an overly long experience, but in terms of the way it blends its atmospheric narrative elements with more traditional action mechanics, there are very few games that rival it on the PS4.
The latest release from Supergiant Games, the acclaimed studio behind indie hits Bastion and Transistor, Pyre is something of a departure from those games and is best described as an action role-playing sports title. Set in a high fantasy world, players control a character who parties up with a group of exiles as they travel through a purgatory of sorts in an effort to cleanse their souls by defeating other exiles. Like Supergiant's other games, Pyre is worth the price of admission just for its exquisite art direction, but the core combat system is the true star here. Featuring a top-down perspective reminiscent of MOBAs like League of Legends and Dota 2, and presenting it as a sport that feels a lot like Rocket League of all games, Pyre's 3-on-3 battles are fun and addicting to the point where it feels like a missed opportunity that Supergiant didn't include an online component. The game supports local multiplayer for 2 players. Really though, that's about the only knock one can level against Pyre, as it excels in nearly every area of its design and tells a surprisingly emotional story to boot. This is arguably Supergiant's best game to date, and it would be a true shame to miss out on it. Some games are able to get pretty far on style alone, and even if Counter Spy, a side-scrolling stealth game developed by Dynamite, played like garbage, it would still be hard to hate it due to its striking art style and cool Cold War-themed music. Set in an alternate history version of the Cold War, Counter Spy lets you play as a spy on either side of the Iron Curtain as you work through randomly generated levels to try and stop the enemy from launching their nukes. Movement is restricted to a 2D plane, but in certain situations, players can aim weapons in 3D space, which helps make Counter-Spy play quite differently from many other side-scrolling indie titles. Unfortunately, Counter-Spy is not without its frustrations. The random nature of the level design can make it so some levels are next to impossible to clear with triggering alarms, which can be frustrating if you're trying to go through in full stealth mode. There are also some AI and control issues that contribute to an overall lack of polish in the gameplay department. Still, if you're a fan of Cold War spy fiction like James Bond or The Man from U.N.C.L.E., it's easy to ignore these drawbacks, as there aren't actually that many games out there like Counter-Spy. First released as a Vita exclusive, Tearaway Unfolded is an enhanced port that retains the whimsical charm of the original while taking full advantage of the DualShock 4 controller's touchpad features. In some ways, the 2 games can be viewed as complementary experiences, as even though they are largely the same game, they offer different perspectives on the same papercraft world Media Molecule has created, thanks to the differences in the Vita and PS4's features. For those who haven't played Tearaway before, it's a third-person platformer with a heavy emphasis on environmental interaction and just generally soaking in the adorably creative world Media Molecule has created. Tearaway Unfolded includes new items and areas to explore, so there's enough here to warrant a double dip if you've already played the Vita edition.
But in a market dominant by violent games, it's nice to see one that truly is made for anyone to enjoy.
World War II games are only now just starting to come back into vogue with Call of Duty's long-awaited return to the bloodiest conflict in human history. But Rebellion has quietly been pumping out WW2 games for years with its Sniper Elite series. Ditching CUD's epic scale approach, Sniper Elite still follows the one-man versus everyone model seen in countless shooters over the years. But in this case, it's because you play a stealthy sniper behind enemy lines. It's an interesting take on empowerment, as you will die in seconds if you try and run and gun approach. But if you're careful and methodical, you can set up some incredible combat encounters in Sniper Elite 4. The series hasn't really evolved much over the years, so you really can't go wrong with either Sniper Elite 3 or 4. But we lean toward picking up the latter because its mission structure is more diverse than its predecessors, and it's easily the most polished. If you don't have a patient bone in your body, Sniper Elite 4 probably isn't for you. But if you're a fan of taking your time and setting up the perfect combat encounter, there are few games that offer as rewarding a stealth-based experience as Sniper Elite 4.
One of the most popular genres to evolve out of the indie scene in recent years are first-person narratives, alternatively known as the somewhat derogatory term walking sim. Titles such as Gone Home and Firewatch have earned rave reviews from critics, but have been criticized by some as not being real games, since they don't contain much in the way of traditional gameplay mechanics and don't have fail states. Setting aside the issue of whether or not something like What Remains of Edith Finch, the latest title from Giant Sparrow, a game or not, the truth is that it offers one of the most affecting narrative experiences on the PS4, and that's not something that should be so easily dismissed. Following the multi-generational history of the Finch family, players explored the family's massive labyrinthine home, learning about each family member at a rapid pace. Although What Remains of Edith Finch only lasts a few hours, it's a beautiful game that would be a shame to overlook.
Very few games successfully jump back and forth between two different gameplay formats as well as Velocity 2X. Featuring a mix of Galaga-esque ship combat and 2D platforming levels, Velocity 2X is, as its name implies, a game focused on speed. You gain new abilities as the game progresses that put an emphasis on rapid movement and attacks, and while it can all be a bit overwhelming at first, the game's intuitive, responsive controls become second nature before long. One of the most clever components of Velocity 2X's design is its sliding difficulty scale. Each level has a running timer, and to achieve 100%, you have to not only finish in a specific amount of time, but hit other specific milestones as well. However, these objectives are entirely optional, meaning you can take your time with each level if you so desire. This is also a cross-buy game on Vita, making it a no-brainer pickup if you own Sony's handheld as well. Playdead made a name for themselves with their fantastic side-scrolling platformer Limbo back in 2010, and while it would be easy to write off their latest game, Inside, as spiritual successor that doesn't really do all that much different, that would be a massive disservice to what the studio has crafted. Simply put, Inside is not only a worthy follow-up to Limbo, but is arguably even better than its predecessor. Although it retains the same try-and-die learning curve, Inside's world feels more fleshed out than Limbo's and is darkly disturbing in all the right ways. Themes of slavery and conformity run throughout, and while some players likely took issue with the game's vague narrative, we adored how open to interpretation everything is, especially the game's third act, which features one of the best twists of the year. It's hard to really talk about Inside without giving much of it away, and considering it's a relatively short experience, it would be a real shame to have this game spoiled. All you really need to know is it's a must-play and arguably the best indie title of the year.
Released in early 2017, it was hard to not know anything about this action role-playing game from Team Ninja considering the rave reviews and hype it received at the time. However, given the flood of other incredible games that would end up being released over the course of the year, it feels like Nioh was quickly forgotten about, which is a shame because it's still one of the best games of its kind on the PS4. Set in a fantastical version of feudal Japan, Nioh owes quite a bit of its design philosophy to Front Software's Dark Souls, as this is another third-person action game with tough but rewarding gameplay and a wealth of conflict to explore.
However, describing Neo as a Dark Souls clone does a disservice to what Team Ninja has accomplished here, as Neo actually plays quite differently, opting for a faster, more aggressive combat style in comparison to Dark Souls' more methodical approach. This is a special game, and without a doubt one of the best PS4 exclusives to date.
Simply put, Rise of the Tomb Raider is one of the best games of this generation. Honestly, it's right up there with Uncharted 4. And yet Crystal Dynamics' best entry in the Tomb Raider franchise has fallen short of Naughty Dog's masterpiece in both sales and overall mindshare. It's hard to tell just how much of an impact Microsoft's infamous exclusivity deal with Square Enix had on the game's prospects, but it does seem like it dampened Rise of the Tomb Raider's impact, as the game finally shipped on PS4 last year, almost a full year after the original Xbox One release, to little fanfare, despite overwhelmingly positive reviews. Of course, Rise's sales couldn't have been that bad, at least if the rumors of a sequel being in the works turn out to be true, but it's fair to say that it didn't do all that well on PS4, or else Square Enix and Sony would be talking about it more. What makes the situation even worse is that the PS4 arguably got the best version of the game, a 20th anniversary edition that came with all of the previously released DLC and additional content, including a level built exclusively for PlayStation VR. If you've somehow avoided Rise of the Tomb Raider up until now, you're missing out on one of the best action-adventure games of this generation.
id Software's Doom reboot was touted by many in the game's press as one of 2016's best games, and a model for how to resurrect a classic franchise. But it's easy to forget that developer Machine Games did the exact same thing 2 years prior with 2014's Wolfenstein: The New Order, which remains one of this generation's best first-person shooters. Featuring a retro-style design with a modern polish, Wolfenstein took a risk by not featuring any multiplayer whatsoever, but it ended up being the right decision on Machine Games' part. The developer focused entirely on crafting an engaging single-player campaign, and what a campaign it is! The New Order is old school in all the right ways, with returning protagonist BJ Blazkowicz able to switch between about a dozen different weapons, and single-handedly take on hundreds of Nazis over the course of the game's 16 chapters. And while the story isn't award-worthy by any stretch, it's still very engaging, thanks in large part to its alternate history setting, in which the Nazis have already won World War II and now control Europe. The best part is that Wolfenstein: The New Order and its excellent expansion, The Old Blood, can now be attained for very low prices and are must-play experiences for anyone who grew up on Wolfenstein and other old-school shooters. And when you're done with those, you can pick up the also very good sequel, Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus.
Just Cause 2 has to be one of the most surprising sequels ever made, as it improved upon its slightly better than average original title in just about every way. Perhaps this helps explain why Just Cause 3 came and went in December 2015, with surprisingly little fanfare as it looked and played a lot like Just Cause 2. While it's true that Just Cause 3 feels like more of an expansion to Just Cause 2 than a full-fledged sequel, this doesn't mean it's not worth playing, especially if you are a fan of what the former game offered. Like many sandbox games though, enjoying Just Cause 3 is very much dependent on how you use the tools it offers, as it doesn't really offer anything close to an engaging story. All you really need to know is that series protagonist Rico Rodriguez likes to fly around and blow things up, and if those activities sound enjoyable to you, you'll probably like Just Cause 3 quite a bit. There are very few open-world games that offer this much freedom or potential for experimentation. Just search for Just Cause 3 stunt videos to see what I mean. And while the game's various objectives do grow stale after a while, this is the sort of game you turn on when you just want to blow everything up and look cool doing it.
Titanfall 2 is an excellent game that had the misfortune of being released at the worst possible time. Sandwiched in between the releases of Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, two of the biggest games of 2016, Titanfall 2 never really stood much of a chance. The most exasperating part of it all is that the game's publisher, Electronic Arts, also publishes the Battlefield series, so they were directly competing with themselves by releasing two first-person shooters marketed to the same demographic in consecutive weeks. It's a shame, really, because even though Battlefield 1 is a phenomenal game, in some ways Titanfall 2 is even better.
Its campaign mode features some of the best level design since Portal 2, and its multiplayer is fast, fluid, and well-balanced. EA claims that Titanfall 2 sales were lower than expected, but honestly, what did they expect when they knowingly sent it out to die? Fortunately, it's not too late to jump into Titanfall 2 if you decided to opt for another big budget shooter at the time of its release, as the game is still receiving small but free updates to its multiplayer, and the campaign mode alone is worth the price of admission. It helps that it's not hard to find a good discount on it. Titanfall 2 should have been a bestseller, but as things stand, it's not even clear whether we'll ever see another game in the franchise.
Assassin's Creed Unity represented a low point for the franchise, so it's not really surprising that the very next game, 2015's Assassin's Creed Syndicate, didn't exactly set the world on fire. It's a shame that Syndicate had to follow Unity because it is a far superior game, and even though it is still very much an Assassin's Creed game, for better and worse, it's arguably one of the best entries in the series. Following dual lead protagonists Jacob and Evie Fry as they work to stop a Templar plot in Victorian London, Syndicate features the most visually impressive and richly detailed environment in the franchise, and is a step up from Unity in just about every category, right down to the characters and mission design. Syndicate also took steps to improve the franchise's traversal mechanics with the addition of the rope launcher, a device that essentially makes you feel like Victorian Batman, as well as carriages to drive and a train when you really need to get somewhere quickly. Overall, Syndicate was not the step forward the Assassin's Creed series so desperately needed. We'd have to wait for 2017's Assassin's Creed Origins to get that, but it is arguably the best overall entry since Assassin's Creed 2, which is really saying something given just how many other Assassin's Creed games there have been in the last decade.